Do you actually have a team, or do you have a group of people who are working for you? That's really important because we might feel like we have a team. They might have told us we have a team, but we might actually have a group. So we have to be honest. If we don't have a team, then let's do what we need to do to get a team. If you have a team, is your team committed to the core mission? If they're not committed to the core mission, you may still have a group because the team members are committed to something. If it's a team, they're all committed to something. So if they're committed to something and maybe not the core mission, then you may have a team, and it may be just a team that's not focused. And then we need to just help them get back on track. But if you have a group of people that are not focused on the mission, then we want to help them get on track. Can your team members depend on each other? Are they able to rely on each other, to support each other? Are they able to depend on each other to come through? And can they trust each other? Can they really trust each other? And should they trust each other? Maybe that's the bigger question. Should your team members trust each other based on what has happened in the past? When there is trust on a team, there's also vulnerability. So if your team members don't feel like they can be vulnerable with each other, and if you don't feel like to a certain extent you can be vulnerable with your team members, then trust is not going to be developed. It's going to start with you as the leader. If you're distrusting of your team, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. One, do you have the right team members on there? Is it a you thing or is it the team thing? Because if it's the team, if you have untrustworthy people on the team, then you need to do something about that. You need to do something about that. You need to figure out what needs to happen so that you can get people on the team that you trust. And you have to make sure it's not a personality issue. As long as it's not a clash of the personalities, you might need to look at if they're doing things that you have properly deemed as being untrustworthy, then devise a plan on how you can get the right people on your team. Now, if it comes down to a you factor where maybe you have had some teams that you've worked with in the past that were not helpful, or you had some life situations where you didn't feel like people were there for you or you couldn't trust them, then that's something you're going to have to work on, okay? Because you don't want that to be filtered into people who didn't deserve it. It's almost like a saying that says someone got cut and they're bleeding on everyone else. With that saying, it's like somebody got hurt, but they're hurting other people who didn't have anything to do with it. If it doesn't have anything to do with your current team, then I really want you to work on developing trust. And it's going to start with you. But if you feel secure and you feel like I have the right people on my team and I can be trusted and they are trustworthy, then there should be vulnerability. Now, what does vulnerability look like in leadership? Vulnerability looks like saying, I apologize, I was wrong, I made a mistake. That's what vulnerability in leadership looks like. It looks like being an imperfect human. And all of us are imperfect humans. None of us are perfect. And when we give ourselves permission to be imperfect, we in turn also give our team members permission to be imperfect. And when we are vulnerable, we're actually being honest. So when we model vulnerability on our teams, then our teams can also mirror that back to us. They can be vulnerable with us, and then it creates a safe environment where team members can be vulnerable with you as the leader, and they can be vulnerable with each other. And when I say vulnerable, I'm not saying share your deepest, darkest secrets, right? That's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is being honest about your work, being honest about what's happening at work, and admitting when you're wrong, and also admitting when you're right, acknowledging your strengths and your weaknesses. Because sometimes people focus on their weaknesses, but they don't acknowledge their strengths. So that's out of balance as well. So when we're in balance, we're actually acknowledging both our strengths and our weaknesses. And that vulnerability is going to build trust because you are talking about your strengths and weaknesses, and your team members are going to be able to do that. And trust me, even if you don't talk about it, they know. They know. So the more in tune you are and self-aware you are, the better the situation is going to be, because it's like, oh, I don't have to tell them this. They already know this and they're working on this, or they acknowledge this. Like, for instance, I am not the person you want to put in charge of the birthday club. I already know. That is not my gifting. That is not my lane. Do not put me in charge of the birthday club. I am not going to remember. I will put people's birthdays inside of my calendar to remind me of them. But yeah, no. Now, if you have a function going on and you need somebody to run the function and make sure that nothing falls out of place or that it runs smoothly, then that's what I can help with, because that is the strength. Or if you need a system to be built, then I can help with that, because that is the strength. So we have to know what our strengths and our weaknesses are. And I know, like, back in the day, that used to be a question on a lot of interviews, like, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, And I know they don't phrase it like that nowadays, or at least I'm not going to tell people what they should or should not do in their interviews. When we're vulnerable, this is going to give permission for others to also not be perfect, like I mentioned. And then this allows them to share their weaknesses as well. And then that actually bonds people, because they feel like, oh, I'm not perfect and you're not perfect. Let's be imperfect together and we'll work together. And where I'm not perfect, you actually are perfect. Where I have a weakness, you have a strength. So, like, I was not the person for the birthday club, but my assistant or somebody else on the team that was just an event planner that loved getting together and building relationships and stuff like that, they were the perfect person for the birthday celebration. Not me. I was not the person for the birthday celebration. So, as leaders, we want to strive for excellence. This allows us to be imperfect, but it also allows us to do our personal best. So, we don't strive for perfection, we strive for excellence. Perfection is going to wear you out, is going to wear you down, it's going to overwhelm you over time. I used to be a perfectionist. I am an ex-perfectionist, and now I am a person of excellence. And that does not mean that I'm going to get it right all of the time, but that means that I am going to strive to do better each and every time and to do my personal best. And I want you to do your personal best as well. And again, all leaders make mistakes sometimes. So to not acknowledge them, again, like I said, other people see them. So to not acknowledge your mistakes is actually folly. Like, that's not something you want to do, because people know, they know. And a lot of leaders, they're afraid to acknowledge. I think a lot of people think that it makes them weak, but it really doesn't make you weak. It actually makes you relatable. So a lot of times those things that can feel scary, those are the things that we need to do in order to actually connect with our teams and to help our teams grow. And your team is going to trust you more when they know that you are aware of both your strengths and your weaknesses. And like I said, it just makes a better work environment, because people are able to be imperfect together. As you're vulnerable with your team members, then they will become vulnerable with you, and then they will become vulnerable with each other, and it creates a safe space, and it actually helps to lend itself towards that high performing team that I talked about. And we always love our high performing teams. We want to use phrases like, I'm not sure, I made a mistake, I apologize. Being vulnerable takes courage. It really, really, really takes courage. And I want you to be courageous. I want you to pull out your leadership muscles. Yeah. And it's going to take time to get there, and it's a process, and you may not get it right every day, but with time, it's going to get easier, and then it's not going to be a problem. Then you'll be like, oh, I made a mistake, and you won't even think anything of it, because you will have built a healthy culture on your team where making mistakes can be acknowledged, and then you just move on. And again, just a caveat, don't share all of your dirty laundry. Don't share any of your dirty laundry. That's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about what you do well at work and what you don't do well at work. We're talking about the workplace. We're not talking about your personal life. Do not share. Just be careful about what you share from your personal life with your employees. The more your team members can relate to each other, the better their relationships are going to be, and the more they're going to like working with each other. And then you're going to have an amazing team. And I want you to have an amazing team. So make sure that you start to work on your vulnerability if that is an area that you need to work on. And again, like I said, I'm not saying to share your personal life, because elements of that may be off limit. And really, as a leader, they should be off limit, because you don't want to become too relatable. When your team members start to see you on their level, meaning that they start to see you as a peer instead of as a leader, then you lose your influence with them. And that's not what you want.